we're joined by Heather Nauert now, spokesperson for the State Department, who can bring some clarity to these questions that are being asked. Heather, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Why didn't the US and its allies wait for the OPCW to get into Syria and carry out its investigations?
Yeah, well, when we look at the OPCW, their role is to get in there and determine exactly what substance was used. That is their only role in doing that, and they are really the gold standard. There is something called the Joint Investigative Mechanism, which is the one that then assigns responsibility. Who used that chemical substance? The Joint Investigative Mechanism is no longer in the works right now, and that's because Russia essentially killed it at the United Nations. So the reason that the U.S., to get to your question, the reason that the U.S. and its allies decided to act is that we all have our own intelligence information that leads us to believe conclusively that Syria acted and that Syria acted with chemical weapons against its own people. So we have our own information. OPCW has its own information as well.
So just on that, could you, to the extent that you're able, just clarify what evidence did you have that it was Assad to blame for this attack and that chlorine and potentially sarin was used?
Yeah, well, some of this is intelligence information that we just can't disclose at this time because it's still classified. But I can tell you we have plenty of evidence that points to Bashar al-Assad. For example, there are other regime elements and other entities that some would like to try to blame, like Russia would like to try to blame, do not have helicopters that can drop barrel bombs. So we know Bashar al-Assad has these helicopters dropping barrel bombs. We know that he has chemical weapons. Russia was supposed to help Syria get rid of its chemical weapons back in 2014 or so. Russia failed to do that. Russia failed to help Bashar al-Assad get rid of those chemical weapons, and that's why we are seeing a continuation of attacks today.
How confident were you, though, that chlorine and potentially sarin had been used? Were you certain?
Again, we have lots and lots of evidence pointing to both chlorine and sarin. We have that information available to the U.S. government. The U.S. has some information. France and the U.K. have information as well. So we acted together as allies, recognizing that we're not wanting to have to do this. Bashar al-Assad, for far too long, has killed innocent men, women, and children. And it's our responsibility as the international community to act. Russia has failed to do so. Iran continues to cause destabilizing activities in Syria. And then Syria, of course, continues to kill its own people. So we came together and said to the world that we have to act and we have to stop this.
There have been some concerns that perhaps the US and its allies, of course, violated the UN Charter in the absence of UN Security Council resolution and a self-defense justification in authorizing the use of force in Syria. What justification under international law do you believe the US and its allies have for intervening in Syria in this case?
You know what? Those claims, the claims that you just mentioned, are completely bogus. And that's something that Russia tries to do, to take the attention away from what really happened. We have a responsibility as a world to attack and stop what Syria is doing. And so the United States, with her allies, went after 3 sites. These are pinprick targets, 3 targeted sites that we know were housing and testing chemical weapons. That is something that we were responsible in doing so. It was the right thing to do so. We look forward to more members of the international community continuing to support what we did. We have heard a chorus of support from many other countries around the world who support what we have done. I would find it hard to imagine that people have a difficult time with our decision to go after these chemical weapons programs at these 3 facilities. The only one who would do so would be Russia and Syria.
There is, of course, a clear moral case for intervention, and I don't disagree with you. But what I'm asking about is what you believe is the basis under international law for intervention. Downing Street issued a legal document talking about the exception allowed to it under humanitarian relief. What is it that the US believes on that?
Well, look, the United States has authority under Article 2 of our Constitution for the president to act in the best interests of the United States and in the interests of our U.S. forces. So United States did that under that, and that is what we support. Look, I'm not an expert in international law. I'm not going to say that I am here, but I am confident in the U.S. and its allies in its decision to do this, to take out those chemical weapons facilities, and I'd be happy to argue that with anyone who takes issue with our decision. The only ones who are going to take issue with our decision to do this, to stop Bashar al-Assad, would include Syria, Russia, and Iran. I don't see anyone else coming out in criticism of these actions.
Has there been a shift in policy on Syria now? What would prompt an intervention, given Nikki Haley's comments that the US is locked and loaded on this issue? Is it now the case that every time you are confident Bashar al-Assad uses chlorine on his own people, you will have to use military force?
Well, first, I tell you what we would like to see Bashar al-Assad do, and that is declare all of his chemical weapons. Declare and get rid of the chemical weapons that they possess. And Russia can help them. Russia was a signatory and agreed to help Syria get rid of its chemical weapons. Russia failed to do so. So that is the first thing that they can do. The United States and her allies reserves the right to go after Bashar al-Assad if he continues these kinds of irresponsible and horrific actions. I'm not going to get ahead of the president or what our allies may decide in the future, but we've made it loud and clear to Bashar al-Assad, this has to stop now.
Has the United States given up on the United Nations Security Council as a useful forum for getting legally binding consensus on issues like Syria?
No, absolutely not. Ambassador Haley, Ambassador Nikki Haley, our U.S. ambassador to the United States, is advocating for this each and every day. We had tried all the diplomatic options over the past year. Unfortunately, those diplomatic options were blocked by Russia, so those diplomatic options failed. That is just how the United Nations and the Security Council happens to work. They have the ability to veto. So we've seen Russia continue to do that, and we've seen Bashar al-Assad continue to attack and kill his own people. The United States, Britain, and France, responsible allies, showing Bashar al-Assad that he has to stop. We will defend the rights of his people even when he won't do it himself.
Heather Nauert.